I'm Lon Tonneson. I'm editor of the Dakota Farmer magazine. I have been covering conservation for about 30 years and focusing pretty heavily in the last 4 or 5 years on soil health. What I hope people take away from my talk is, or the stories I'm going to tell, because I'm going to tell some stories about conservation success in soil health. I don't farm myself, so I'm telling the stories of people I've interviewed, and I hope the experienced folks here are reminded that there's more that they can do, and I hope the people who are just getting started in soil health, or maybe have not yet made the jump, are inspired by some of these stories of, their fellow farmers that are giving it a try. Well, you know a little bit about who I am, but I'm going to tell you who I am not. I am not a farmer. I don't know how to farm. I'm not a scientist. And I got to figure out how to run this. There we go. I keep this quote on my desk. What you do is very hard. What I do is very easy. And I've edited my remarks about after every speaker, and I think I should just throw them out. So I don't farm, but I can appreciate a little bit of what you go through as farmers, trying to make a living from the land. I live on an acreage, and my wife and I help put our kids through college with income from an entertainment farm. And some years, because of flood, frost, hail, or snow, there was less profit than I hoped. I know what it's like to lose a crop. I know what it's like to suffer a loss without insurance. I know what it's like to hoe weeds for weeks on end. And despite what I heard here from the last speaker, I still like Roundup. I mean, if I could have had Roundup when I was hoeing those darn pumpkins every day for all summer, I would have gladly used it. So the point is, I can feel your pain, but I can also appreciate your joy of seeing so much abundance grow from such small seeds. So I won't be telling you how to farm. Instead, I'm going to tell you some stories about farmers and soil health. And for those stories, I have a deep well to go to, because I work for the Dakota Farmer, which has been around for 134 years, 1884. The whole first 20, 30 years was pictures of horses and oxen. And the Dakota Farmer has probably been publishing stories about soil health for that long too. But nobody called it soil health until recently. They called it building the soil. Kurt Ahrens, my colleague down in Nebraska, he writes for the Dakota Farmer. He came up with a soil health wisdom from a century ago. I mean, sometimes when I look back, I mean, what I'm doing now is the same thing they were writing about in the 1800s, 1900s. This one was from 1909. In 1909, Harold Schutze bought a farm that he described as corned out. Now, can you imagine being corned out in 1909? Arnold spent months digging out rocks and filling ditches and gullies that had formed by tillage and erosion. He filled those gullies and ditches with old straw. On a particularly bad spot, he, quote, scattered high-quality hay on top of the straw and turned cattle out on it so they would bed down there and wait to be fed there in the morning. Eventually, he put in new soil on top of that, and then he planted alfalfa on that, and then he started using a crop rotation that included liberal use of clovers and made sure he kept applying manure to that area. It kind of sounds like what you all have been talking about here today. But he said we should look to the future and see what it'll mean 20 years from now if present conditions are allowed to continue. We should look ahead, he said, and think of our children. This is 1909. But of course, we know what happened 20 to 25 years later. That happened. And it didn't happen for just 1 year. It happened for a series of them. And it happened in the Dakotas, not Oklahoma, where I expect it to be dry. And because of this, and this was the equipment would have been my grandfather had to use, and your grandfathers. This is what happened. And it kept happening. That is South Dakota, Rosebud. Another South Dakota picture. Another one. And so on. You guys have seen a couple of these. So what did the Dakota farmer write about? In the 1930s, most of the news wasn't about those dust storms. The news was about the need for more surface water. The idea seemed to be that if we had more surface water, we would produce more rain. In a letter to the magazine, the old-timer Lemon urged everyone to dig ponds and create lakes on their farms by damming up the drainage. A county commissioner advocated using roads as dams to hold water. And we saw what that meant in the 1990s up here in the Northern Plains. All those dams flooded our fields, some of them washed out our roads. This is when there was talk of damming the Missouri River, which you see behind you. There were also frequent articles about the importance of crop rotation and using clovers to build up soils. There was a national conservation plan announced that where they would pay you incentives to plant soil-building crops. So you might think we have come a long ways on soil health, and most of you in the room have. But that's my place, a mile from my place this spring. This is Miller, South Dakota this spring. I think Gabe showed pictures of this too. I started writing about, I started at the magazine in 1981, and this was at the beginning of no-till, and I eventually met Dwayne. This was one of the scientists he worked with, and this was the take on no-till at that time. It might be where we are with some of the cover crops as the way the non-enthusiasts look at it, I guess. But here's where we are with no-till today. South Dakota's 45% no-till, mulch till, so about 75% reduced tillage or no tillage. And I would expect the data from South Dakota and many other states in the Great Plains to be the same. I'm not sure when the soil health and cover crop business started in the Dakotas. Some of you in this room have been at it 20, 30 years. Some of it's your whole career. And frankly, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. Not until I was on a tour at Gabe Brown's, and he said that. He said that was his break even on corn. And I had to go up to him afterwards and say, did I hear you right? Was that your break even on corn? And I think we heard from the gentleman from North Carolina on his 312 bushel corn yield contest winner. His break even was what, $1.45. There you go. Kind of an aside here, John Lundgren, the previous speaker, said, well, or was asked, well, what are we doing to encourage it? Tell that number. Just use it all the time. Tell people what your break even is. So since that day at the Browns field day, I've interviewed many farmers about what they're doing with soil health. Now, I got to do a little interactive here. I know a lot of you. I've been to your farms. I know you're way ahead of what I'm going to show you. But how many are not doing the soil health thing yet? Anybody? Everybody in here is into the soil health. There are some students, because I've been sitting with them, and they're doubters, some of them. Okay, so most of you are all in it. You don't need to see these quick stories about how people I've interviewed have kind of gotten down the road. I mean, I come here to this and I'm blown away, and I salute you. You guys are doing so great, but it's overwhelming. And what I'm trying to do with the Dakota Farmer is show people how they can get into it. Show them the simpler steps. And maybe that's not right, because I understood you have to have a systems approach. But North Country No-Till was one of my favorite ones the past couple years. Young guy out of Grand Forks. And Dwayne Beck, where are you? You always tell me how tough it is, or how you wish people in the Red River Valley were doing more, and they're starting to. This guy is. I guess I'll run through it. What I liked about him is he gave me a simple formula about how he starts no-till. It's not all this, well, you got to figure out this, you got to figure out that, you got to, whatever happens with the weather. He laid out a 6-year plan for how he transitions a conventional farm into no-till. He makes a 6-year commitment never to till. But what I thought was interesting is I hear a lot of guys start by going to soybeans, because soybeans can do pretty well in residue. He starts with corn. He tills the heck out of the field ahead of it to control the weeds, plants corn, and never tills it again. Now that may be completely wrong, but this is what I run into. This is what he says is working for him. And he's working cover crops into that. I think you can read that there. I wanted to make mention that Ken Miller, I've been out to your farm. Jerry Doan, I've been out to yours. I try to go to all the Leopold winners. It's a great program. It's a way to get easy publicity. This is Jerry Doan's family. But what I loved about Jerry Doan was, this family has done just about everything. They're pioneers, early innovators, but he says he's always looking for the next new thing. And there's so much more that they can do to improve their stewardship. That's their winter grazing. There's been some talk about how terrible confinement agriculture is, or livestock confinement. This guy with this field is one of the biggest dairy operators in the I-29 corridor. And he's interested in cover crops behind his silage. And he's my age, in his 60s, maybe he's younger, 50. But he says he was taught that you have to till and fluff up the soil, not only to get a good stand and get good weed control, but so that the soils would absorb moisture in the spring. And now he's no-tilling and planting cover crops after chopping silage in one spot. I always try to get an annual story about what Dwayne Beck is doing. I think he'll be talking about that, but he's bringing back the cows, I guess. When I was sitting over there with Bismarck State College students, and I could tell, I talked to some of them and they were interested in, they're getting started farming. Hey, cover crops and your soil health thing is a great entry point for beginning producers because they get to get 2 crops off the same piece of land if they manage it right. This guy up in Park River, North Dakota, is no-till farming and custom grazing cover crops. This guy in South Dakota, Joe Fritzy, he's doing the custom grazing, corn stalks, he puts cover crops in there. I guess it's pretty common. But he told me a neat thing. He said he has to make money doing with this, right out of the block. He has to make money because he can't take worms to his banker. So, you always find interesting things. This was interesting to me, and maybe some of your grazers out there, but this is his corner post for his electric fencing. He either has somebody make 200-pound blocks for him or makes it himself, and his wife is their fencer, and she moves it around with the tractor or skid steer. Kind of a neat idea. Sugar beets is probably one of the most soil destructive crops around. Man, you tear up the soil getting it out, and then you got to work it to get it back to lay level. This is, but there are cover crops going on in it. This guy is former president of the South Dakota corn growers, and they plant rye strips in the spring, not so much for soil health, but the rye strips protect the young sugar beet seedlings from helicoptering in the valley's winds. I've heard some people laugh about people tiling, and I know NRCS doesn't like it because they've told me several times when I've asked them about it. But this guy, Lynn Brackey from the Red River Valley, eastern part of the state, smart guy, I think. He's got yay much topsoil, and then it's a blue clay. A clay for 50 to 100 feet, because it's the bottom of the Red River Valley. He said the only way he could get into this is tile that 2 feet, because the water would get down onto the clay, and then as more and more rain fell, it would build up and just turn the topsoil to soup. So he tiles, then he uses cover crops and no-till to manage the moisture that is in that top 2 feet area. The valley's problem has largely been too much water. He uses a stripper header. Sorry. Planting green, you guys have talked about that. It's pretty amazing. I followed that planting green field. I went back 4 or 5 times over the course of the summer because it was on the interstate on my way to someplace. And there was a conventionally tilled soybean field. For about the first 3 months, I wouldn't have traded the conventionally tilled beans for the other ones. August, they looked about the same. And the farmer told me that they yield satisfactorily for him. So he was happy. In North Dakota, I haven't heard many of you guys who are really advanced in your cover crops and no-till talking about this, because I think you've probably solved the problems. But there's a huge problem across the state with saline soils. And there's a lot of activity going on in the use of cover crops to try to fix that, and to use to try to increase the infiltration rate of the soil above where the water is ponding. Soil rescue, you talked about an award for somebody with organic matter. This is Bill Nelson, Del Rapids, South Dakota. He went to Vietnam out of high school. His dad kept farming. Bill came home from the war, went to Boeing as an aerial or aircraft engineer. His dad got older, rented the farm out. The tenant ruined the farm. And Bill bought it back when he retired, and he's built the soil organic matter up to 6.5% with all the practices you all have been talking about. One reason that we're writing so much about, or one reason I am writing so much about soil health is so many people are pushing me good ideas. NRCS has just been a wealth of information. I can't thank them enough, and the soil conservation districts. I was surprised to get this one, turning red acres green, and it involves Pheasants Forever. They've hired precision ag and conservation specialists that take a software program and turn your yield maps plus your input costs into profitability maps. And then these guys, this is a group of guys, young guys down by Lemoore, North Dakota, who are working with this woman, Melissa Schachman, to figure out better ways to deal with spots like that. And this is a low area that drains 5 quarters through his field, so he tried planting salt-tolerant alfalfa in there. It flooded out, and he's going to plant like reed canary grass next time, I guess. What's interesting about Pheasants Forever is they not only look at the crop mix you might plant, but they look at the programs. So they figured out for this guy, hey, if you put that whole quarter section into the plots hunting area, you can make money over the whole thing, including the area that was giving you trouble. Another saline area. I like list stories. I think they're simple and easy. So this will probably be too elementary for all of you who have been advanced, who are advanced on your thing, but these are lessons learned about strip till and no-till from the conservation, what is it called? The CCSP farm at Foreman, which is Eastern North Dakota's version of Dakota Lakes. Kind of a younger child, I guess, younger son. That's kind of what the country looks like. So their top lessons, this is what the manager sent me when I asked him, well, what did you learn in the past 10 years? Do you want me to read them? You can see them. The one that surprised me was the best corn hybrids in conventional till weren't the same ones in strip till or no-till. So if you're not testing hybrids on your farm, you may be missing something there. That's a lot of yield difference. One year it was 30, usually it's 4 to 7. Bio strip till outperformed conventional strip till and cut gully erosion. I haven't heard you guys talking about that too much yet. Something that's going to be on my radar. I've run into 3 or 4 people using it where they're planting radishes where their corn is going to be and rye where between the rows. This is going to make you mad. Dave Franzen, North Dakota State University Extension soil scientist, and to me a pretty good, he seems like he knows what he's doing. He says he's seeing a yield drag in corn planted in a cover crop residue. It's on the Joe Brecker farm, and Joe has been cover cropping and no-tilling for a long time. But Joe has said, hey, there's something wrong with my corn. My neighbors are getting a lot more. And I know you guys don't like to talk about yield, but I and some of us are greedy. We want both profit and yield. So watch for, if you're from North Dakota, you can watch for information about what he's seen. And, you know, I was out at Joe Brecker's farm for the field day, and there was a visible difference because he took us right to the different replications where the corn was yellow on the bottom and the ones next to it weren't. Lee Breeze from Central Crop Consulting is an expert on weed control. So if you ever have questions about weed control, especially with interseeding, give me a call and look him up. He says, don't you dare cut back on weed control just because you think you're going to go to a cover crop later. He says you can really manage it. Ray Archuleta, you know, but the thing I wanted to point out is I've never been to a field day where no-till cover crop loses the runoff contest. This was different. An NDSU soil scientist, or a forage specialist, Marisol Birdie, she says she likes sorghum Sudan grass interseeded in corn. She says it yields, the two together yield more forage for silage, and plus if you cut it off for silage or bale it, the sorghum Sudan grass will grow back most years, even up here in the north, and you can graze it later. Have you heard of chemical mowing? This is Chris Heitzman. He's he has a pheasant operation on his farm. He does fee hunting. He plants his food plots with a cover crop right in them. He's planting with a grain drill and dividing the boxes, but he'll plant them all at the same time. It's Roundup Ready corn, and then when it's time to spray, he'll put on a real light rate of Roundup and set back the cover crop, not kill it, and then his pheasants end up with food and cover. He's real happy with it. And this is just a little tweak that I found in South Dakota. I think there's some people from that soil conservation district here. Jeff Hemmer, they're going early beans early, planting early maturing beans for their area, April 15th to April 25th. They're planting them before they plant corn, yielded 80 bushels an acre and gave him more time to get a cover crop on there. This is a headline that you might think is about soil quality or soil health, but I'm hoping it's not, and I'm hoping one day that I see an auctioneer say that good dirt refers to your soil health thing. But I imagine not many of you are interested in selling your land, but you may be interested in renting more land. And this is Brad. Brad, you're here today. There you are. I did a story with Brad about their farm in Gavin, Minnesota, and they've actually picked up some land because of what they're doing with soil health. Happened to be some Pheasant Forever land, but he said other landlords have been talking to him and his dad about, hey, can you do this? In fact, I don't know if she's still here. There was a landlord here today talking to me in the back, and she said, you know, my tenant is not doing this, and I wish he was here. She said, maybe I got to write something into the contract. South Dakota Association of Soil Conservation Districts did a survey, and they were talking to non-operating landowners trying to measure their interest in soil health. And you can see that it's a pretty big, 3/4 of them are either experimenting, encouraging their tenant, or had strong interest. So that may add up to opportunity, maybe not maybe especially for young farmers. So to conclude, if I can find my place, I wanted to leave you with a couple things. If you're well down the road on soil regeneration already, I salute you. Congratulations. I hope you can make your dream of getting premiums for the nutrient density of your food you produce come true. I'll be anxious to report on your success. And I guess there are no no-tillers, non-soil cover crop people in here. But if you go home and talk to them, encourage them to try it. Keep your message simple, because what you do is intimidating. And finally, I think I dropped it. And finally, I learned something at this summit that I can tell Dakota farmer readers who aren't here today about soil health. And there are a lot of them. You know, we've got 14,000 subscribers in the Dakotas. There's what, 700 people here? That's a big audience that's not here. Maybe they're not interested in soil health. Maybe they feel like they're doing well financially, monocropping, using synthetic fertilizers, raising livestock in confinement, and growing genetically modified crops. I'm not going to argue with their success. I'm not a farmer. Some of them have been farming the same land for 125 years. If that's not sustainable, it's a big chunk of sustainability. But I can tell them, but instead of telling them that they're doing something wrong, I'm going to tell them what Chris Nichols apparently told Gabe Brown. I can tell them, you're doing great, but maybe you can do better. Thank you. So I promise to be done early because I don't like meetings that go over, so. Any questions?
A couple minutes if there's a couple
Any
questions for
comments?
Lon.
Any shots? I got in a lot of trouble over the election. I wrote a column that took the commodity groups to task for being so timid on the China trade thing. And I said, God darn it, you guys, instead of trying to send President Trump pictures of your family on Facebook, why don't you tell them you're going to vote Democrat? And oh man, did I get killed. So, so if anything? Well,
Another round of applause for Mr. Tonneson.